I've heard like the first one we did. I'll try and sit down and yeah, no, it's harder to do. Yeah, exactly.
All right, well, greetings everyone. Thank you very much for attending our Homecoming 2021 Beta Omicron Distinguished Alumni Visitor Panel. My name is Jason Napoli, and I am the Director of Employer Relations and Career Coaching in the Berry Career Institute. And I must say that selfishly, one of my favorite parts of my role is to welcome guests to our campus for this distinguished program. The Beta Omicron Distinguished Alumni Visitor Program was created about 15 years ago and was made possible by the generous leadership gift of Lee Swanson from the class of 1960 and his wife Jackie. Lee got together some of his friends from his era, all members of the Beta Omicron social group, to put together an endowment that will welcome alumni to campus for our students to learn from and with right here on the hilltop. We're very excited and fortunate to have some active Beta Omicron members here today, as well as some Beta Omicron alumni. So thank you very much for attending today. Today, our guest has been on campus for a couple days, and that is Heather Bird Roberts from the class of 09. After a series of meals with students and classroom visits and a career development workshop, this is the final program that Heather will be delivering during her residency here on campus. I'm going to give Heather the opportunity to share a bit more about her background and experiences in a bit. But Heather is an arts administrator, a creative catalyst, entrepreneur, and author. So we're really excited to have Heather on campus here today. Heather is joined by two of our colleagues here at Cornell. To my left here is Dan Rexroth from the class of 1982. Dan is the editor of the Cornell Report, which we're going to talk a bit more about here in a bit. And then on the far end here is my colleague, Amy Collier. Amy is the Senior Diversity Officer here on campus, as well as the Director of Intercultural Life. So with that said, the title of our panel today is called Being Seen, Bringing Diverse Stories to the Cornell Report. Many of you attending here live, as well as watching online, would have received our Cornell Report over the summer, and that is where Heather was the guest editor, the first ever guest editor of the publication. So we're really excited to focus and take a deep dive into the publication here, from concept to print. So that said, I'm going to ask Heather to introduce yourself a little bit more, share a bit more about your background and experiences, and we will continue the conversation from there.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me just fine?
Perfect.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hey. As mentioned, my name is Heather Bird Roberts. Prefer to call me Heather or Bird. Use she, her pronouns. And I am a lot of different things, right? So I am what I call a parallelpreneur. And so I have a 9-to-5 where I serve as the Director of Education at a literary nonprofit called Young Chicago Authors. And that's where the work that we're doing is really surrounding around how can we elevate stories around the city and bring people together so that we can have more diverse storytelling, right? So I really enjoy my job there. I work with a lot of educators in that role to not only give them the tools, but also allow them to really work with students in a way that the educational system doesn't normally embrace, right, on a regular basis. And then also, I own my own business called Birds World, and that space, that space is really built to inspire and transform lives through creativity, right? And so a lot of what I do really is help entrepreneurs and writers really get out of their heads onto the page and into creative action and find ways to reignite their creative joy. A lot of the times as we get older, that creativity and that joy is stripped from us because we're told we need to be on a certain path. And I'm really passionate about what are the ways in which we can bring that back, what are the ways that we can highlight storytelling as adults and give them the tools to also share their story. So I'm really excited to be back. It is wild to be here. I usually come back at least 2 times a year. But you know, COVID has done some things and switched some things around. But it's great to be able to just be in classrooms and leading discussions around the educational system and what things can we do to really be proactive in how we are pulling together our curriculum. What are all the stories that are built within us as we are mapping out our lives? And then what does entrepreneurship look like, right? I got to meet the current president of Lyrically Inclined, which is a group I started 16 years ago. So it's just, and so it's just really good to be back. I'm really thankful to be in this space. And so yeah, I'll kind of stop there. I don't know if there's anything in particular. There's so much. Like, what do I talk about?
Great, thank you so much, Heather. Actually, so I'm going to turn things over to Deanne real quick to share. Deanne is the longtime editor of the Cornell Report, and we just wanted to see if you could share a little bit about how the first guest editor role ever had come to be over the summer.
Sure. We planned way ahead on each issue of magazines. It takes a long time to put together, so it's a year, 2 years out, we're planning those issues. And so it was the summer of 2020, and Cornell had a new strategic plan developing, and part of that plan prioritized diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in fact, they just appointed he to be our senior diversity officer, our very first one. It was a senior position. So that summer, I was aware of that, thinking about that, and then there was the murder of George Floyd and everything that happened after that. And I think I saw an opportunity developing that we could do something. We need to do something. We need to cover this. We need to do something in reaction to this. It's part of our plan. And I saw a very special issue of Vanity Fair magazine, and they had a guest editor, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it was an amazing issue. It was so inspiring. The cover story was on the life of Breonna Taylor, and they was like painting of her, and an interview about her life, and I was so inspired, and I thought, you know, I can't do anything like that, but I could find, we have alumni, I could find a guest editor to do this. And so I talked with assistant editor Lisa Gray-Gerard. She cannot be here today. We're very sorry. She was a big part of this issue with us. And she agreed, totally agreed. What a great idea. And I knew that I would need to approach leadership. I would need to talk to alumni and advancement staff if we work together on planning a magazine. But I realized that really the first person I should talk to was he, the senior director of, what's your title? Diversity officer.
Senior diversity officer and director of intercultural life.
Yeah. So, because I thought I needed to talk to him before going anywhere else. It's kind of under his program, how would this work into what he's doing, and that sort of thing. So I gave him a call and I started explaining it, and he was totally on board. He thought it was a great idea. And then I said, well, we need to find just the right person to do this. Somebody who is a writer, editor, somebody who knows Cornell more than just, has some connection with Cornell more than maybe anything else. And I said, well, I have somebody in mind. And I just wanted to ask you what you thought about this person. And then I said, he said, well, I have somebody in mind. And so I'm going to pass it to Hebe to finish the story.
So before I start, I want to appreciate having me up here. Sometimes I feel like
I was just at the beginning. I didn't have a whole lot to do with it, but I just appreciate the opportunity. So, as Dan said, you know, having this conversation, she like, well, I have someone in mind. And actually, even before she got it out, she was like, no, guest editor. And I'm like, I know the perfect person. I was like, this is gonna, I'm like, as soon as she get done, we're gonna let her know. And so we both were like, Heather. So I'll pause a little bit. So a little background between this and my relationship with Heather. Me and Heather go back all, 12 years? You say that? 13 years. So I met Heather when she was a senior here, and it was my first year, my first stint here coaching football. And so I met her then, and we've had a great friendship since then. I've watched her grow as a writer, as an educator, and so immediately I'm like, there's no other person I think of that who can write this article or write this publication for this topic, for this place, other than Heather. So I'm like, so she's like, yeah, Heather Roberts. That's like what I was thinking. And then it kind of just went from there. We reached out to Heather, obviously, and as we say, here we are, right? So my role in this whole thing, and I still use it loosely, was kind of a consultant for the most part. Like, what do you think? What are some things here? And a lot of the information, a lot of the articles that were sent my way, I was like, this is gonna be good. Yeah, that looks good to me. I like that. Don't change anything. And so just as everything was getting put together, because we wanted to make sure not only we put something out, we put a great product out. A lot of times, and not just around DEI, just in general, people just put things out just because they have to do it. But I think, let me rephrase that. I know Dan, Heather, and Lisa, they put a lot of time, effort, and work, and was very careful, very methodical in what they did and how they did it, and what they put together. And I remember texting Heather once it came out. I said, I am so proud of her because the work that they put into it, the work that she put into it, and you as well, Dan, I'm going to go to you, but I'm so proud of you all for the work that you all put into it. It's a phenomenal publication. So if you haven't read it, please read it. Please read it. And so I guess I'm going to talk a little bit more about my role here on campus. So initially when President Brand approached me about the position, I was not going to lie, I was a little nervous because, as the director of ICL, you work with students, and you go directly to students and kind of get, hey, what do I like and things like that. So a lot of the things that I was doing as the director was student based and education and programming. Those are things that I'm used to. Those things I feel like I'm good at. But this role is, for lack of a better word, it's at the administration policy level. So it's essentially setting the goal, the vision, and the direction of diversity and inclusion for an entire college. Thank you, President Grant, for putting me in this book. I'm thinking in my head, oh, this guy's crazy. Why is it me? You want me to do this? Good luck. No, but it was, so my role is to just to make sure we're moving in the direction that we want to move. It's an honor to be sitting in this role. Not many colleges our size are actually really thinking about doing, talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I will say that I think I know as an institution, it is a priority for us. The sheer fact that my role is created, the sheer fact that we did this publication we put out, all the things that we're doing, it's a priority. So essentially my goal is to make sure as an institution we're moving in the direction that we want to move in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Holding ourselves accountable where we need to be held accountable, celebrating ourselves when we need to celebrate ourselves, just making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is going to be a lot of work. Major change, major culture changes, and for the students in the room, understand changing the culture of anything, whether it's college, whether it's a family, it takes time and a lot of work. It's not easy. If you want to change culture, it has to be done thoughtfully and intentionally. And I really feel like that's where we're at now. So that's kind of a little bit of what I do.
Excellent.
And I also coach women's lacrosse. I can put that up there.
Yes, and women's assistant lacrosse coach. Thank you very much, Hebe. And not only thank you for only sharing those thoughts and ideas, but thank you for your leadership here on campus with everything you do. Let's give Hebe another round of applause. Thanks, Hebe. So as I mentioned before, the primary topic today is about the ICU edition of the Cornell report. So what we'd like to do next is to have Heather share a little bit more about the process and just the invitation you got, what that was like, the process you went through, and how we got to the final print production.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. So I think I'm still processing it all. My love for Cornell runs deep. I was here from 2005 to 2009. Very active across campus, did a lot of different things. Before the diversity committee was even a committee, it was called the Multicultural Council. I was on that and like moving that forward. And so there's a lot of history here as me as a student. I was an athlete, played volleyball and basketball. I did a lot of things here. And I saw a lot of things and was involved with a lot. And then even came back. And so from 2010 to 2014, I worked in the Intercultural Life office. There's a story behind that. We'll share that later. I came back as the assistant director and had an opportunity to be the interim director for a little bit too. And so I saw the progression of where we were from the time of 2005 to 2014 and the strides that we were making, along with the things that also needed to be done as long as we were committed to continue doing this work. And so when I got the call to be the guest editor for this, when I tell you, there were nights I did not sleep because I go through fits of creative mania. And when I saw this opportunity that there's so much that's not going to fit in this issue, one of the questions I ask is how are we making sure that we're going to continue this work outside of just this issue? Like this issue is important and we have a tendency to say, oh, we did this thing, check a box and move on. Like what is that intentional work that's being done within the institution? And so just hearing where we were, what Kimi was doing, when I tell you I don't know how you're sleeping, when you see, like if you grab the magazine, right, there is an entire timeline of just the thing Kimi has done over the course of 9 months that is here. And look at this list, 9 months, right? And we published this in June. And so things are happening here. We're in a really great space. So I was extremely honored to get that email and that call. And then to just be a part of the process of putting this together. I couldn't have had a better team to do that, so that's really great. So before I dive in a little bit more, what I want to be able to do is actually read the first message that's in the Cornell report. When you open it up, it's the message from me as the guest editor, and I think it really sets the stage for where we are today. So the summer of 2021 Cornell report is not a typical issue. With the theme, I See You, the goal is to begin to construct a necessary platform for diversity, equity, and inclusion, related work, and amplify as many alumni of colored voices as possible. For some, these pages will affirm experiences. For others, there may be a temptation to question the need for transformation. For the latter, I ask you to invite humanity into your homes. Some articles will require you to pause, reflect, reread, and sit with your discomfort. I ask you to resist the urge to dismiss people's experiences and invite curiosity and understanding. I welcome respectful and courageous conversation. Understand, for some of us, we've been having this dialogue for decades, and the labor is substantial. By no means does this issue cover the entire spectrum and complexity of DEI work. We desire to continue highlighting diversity in the wide range of stories represented on Cornell's campus and beyond. I want this work to live on past this particular issue. I could not have done this without the contributors' trust and vulnerability in my vision. I spent many days in tears of joy. The stories presented here are real. Believe them. Eyeballs, they're doing this thing. They sweat a little bit. I am honored to share this space with you as the Cornell Report's first guest editor. The contents in these pages are just the beginning. I dedicate this special issue to all the Cornellians, especially the overlooked, the invisible, or the disregarded. You are not alone. I see you. Let the conversation begin. Oh, that was unexpected. Hello, emotions. Yes, so thinking just about all that was said there, there is so much. I remember having a conversation with Deanne, and at first the idea was for me to write the entire thing, which is a great idea. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking this idea. But what we were missing were the voices of multiple people, of multiple experiences. How can we make sure that we are seeing ourselves in the Cornell report? You know how many people told me that are of color, they pick up the report and they flip through it because they don't see themselves. They toss it. How powerful is representation in what we're talking about, right? How do we make sure that we are seeing faces that we don't normally see in the Cornell report? How are we making sure that we're highlighting the possibilities that our students can be and see, and having those conversations that sometimes you can only have with someone who shares your experiences, right? And so to the fact that we were able to do this and putting this issue together was not easy. There were several times where I had to put on my entrepreneurial hat, right, and help folks actually tell the story because there was fear in telling their actual story. They thought there was one conversation I had specifically where I got a draft and I was like, I want you to go deeper. And they were scared. And I'm like, what are you gonna do, take your diploma away? That fear, 15 years later, still lived within them. So what does it mean for us to actually create space around that? So I'm super proud of this issue. I don't think it's actually hit me yet, but it's happened. As you can see, apparently, along with Huey's text that made me cry like a big old baby. But yes, I just kind of want to set the stage for that. And no, thank you, Mimi. And yes, I if you haven't read it, I really encourage you to pick it up and read it. It's really looking at not only DEI issues at a surface level, but what we can do to actually look at this from the root level. Where is this stemming from? And how can we be proactive in moving forward as an institution and be trailblazers in this? Like what I want to see and what a Huey's dreams is, how do we, what did you say, how can we be like the go-to place for DEI work? Other colleges should be coming to us to figure out how to move these conversations along. That should be our goal. So what are we doing on a daily basis to make that happen?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Heather. So one thing I want to just mention right now, and I have a couple more questions to continue the conversation, is that we would love for this to have audience participation. So if you have any questions, thoughts, feelings, please raise your hand and participate. Also want to speak to our attendees on the live stream. There is a chat box option that you're welcome to share comments and questions as well. So that said, I'll get another question going for our panel, and please, bring your thoughts to my attention. But Heather, can you share a little bit more about how the additional articles and writers were chosen? Having been here for 12 years, it was really exciting to see some students from the past decade or so, staff as well. Can you share a bit more about what went into that, and also what those conversations were like that you had with those individuals?
Absolutely, yes, that's a really great question. So I'm a firm believer in brainstorming. Like, I can have all the ideas in the world, but if they're not actually going to be received well by other people, what is it that I am doing, right? So I wanted to make sure that the information that we were presenting was digestible, right? If I would have just went hard, like a great example that I received from Dr. Eddie Ward Jr., who's also featured in the interview, because we started the White Privilege, he started the White Privilege Conference here at Cornell, and that's not something that's talked about often, right? And one of the things he said is, like, you can't jump into, if you think about Spanish 101, 102, 103, 201, all of that stuff, right? You can't jump into 401 until folks actually have the foundation. So what does it look like for us to have the foundational conversation? And so I wanted to be able to brainstorm topics, and then once we were able to identify topics, who would be great to tell that story and would be willing to tell that story. Because to be honest with you, there are some folks that I wanted in this issue who did not feel comfortable. They did not have a great relationship with the college because of their experience, and I think that's really honest to think about. Like, Cornell is a really great place, but there are pockets, there are holes, and how are we addressing some of those holes, right? And so there are some folks that did not want to be a part of it. But for the folks who did, thinking about what is the story? When you're like looking for a story, we can start at the surface, we can start where we are, but let's go back 10 years. Let's go back 5 years. Let's figure out where you were. There's an article in here by Diego Verdugo, and he talks about his experience as a first generational student coming to Cornell. How often are we telling that story? And not just like, oh, you're here and you thrive, great. What was it like getting here with a suitcase, a backpack, a bag of tamales, and no support system? What does it look like to send this Cornell report home and have parents who might not speak English actually be able to read this? And so his article in particular is bilingual. It's one side English, one side Spanish. So how are we making sure that our articles are accessible? When thinking of, that was the first time ever we had a bilingual article in there. So how can we do more of these things? And so when thinking about who to bring to the table, I have, you make me do math, I'm a poet. From 05 to 14, I span over those classes in some sort of way. But we had a database that we have been thinking about, because one of the also things that we highlight in here is the Alumni of Color Association. And so, like, we've been talking about what does that look like to bring folks back and have that conversation and build camaraderie to help students along this track of being at Cornell. And so there's not one easy answer for that. It was really like, what topics are possible? What story do we want to tell over the course of the magazine? And then being able to identify as most diverse voices as possible to tell this story. How are we making sure that we have someone who is a pastor, we have someone who is a musician, we have someone who is in the mental health industry telling stories so that all students can see the possibility of who you can be when you grow up and how the Cornell education aids in your future.
Excellent, thank you, Heather. Are there any questions from the audience at this stage? Yes.
Thank you. My question is, in terms of the article, what aspect about it are you the most proud of, like, collectively? The quality that you're just most proud of?
I can't say the whole thing, huh? It's not an option. I would say it's the most difficult one that's in there. And to have the opportunity to present something in there that is difficult and it be received and I don't know if approved is the right word, but like approved by the college, for us to really talk about where we are and the root cause of how we got to where we got to, that takes a lot of guts to be able to own that and say that. And that's actually the beginning of the work that needs to be done. And so, like I said, I can't say the whole thing. And they all hold a very important part. But what's coming to mind right now is the dehumanization article. Really taking a look at where, really taking a look at where this all stemmed from. and why we are where we are, and how this affects both people of color and folks who identify as European or white or other, whatever, right? This affects us all. And so how can we really have the conversation about where we are as an institution and how we can move forward? I mean, there's a line in here that starts off that says, as an alumna of color, I remember the extra burden of making sense of myself by myself without the language to even describe my experience at a predominantly white institution. Like, to start off an article just with that is huge, right? So I'm proud of every single article. I am proud of every single person that contributed. I think if we were to take a look at the work that needs to be done and the root, it would be the dehumanization. That was a hard one. Way to start it off.
Thank you for the question, Henry, and the response to others. Any other questions from the audience at this stage? Yes, would you like the microphone, or can I just repeat?
I can say that I'm Steve Zasaki, class of 76. I was a student of Julia Durham. And there was nothing in the last quarter report about music. What's happened to the Monday evening series?
So the question was about music in the Monday series that is typically featured in the Cornell report.
Oh, I worked with the Boys Choir in Harlem.
Hi, Steve. We did feature Charles Thomas Hayes, 77.
Oh, yes, a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Dr. Martin Messiah. What about the Monday festival, the Monday series, concert series?
Well, we were focusing more on people and the issues around DEI rather than the series, the concert series for this issue.
All right, looking forward to coming back.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you. And thank you for the explanation, Dean. Any more from the audience here? Yes, Professor Katie Stewart. Let me come around.
Hi, others.
Hello.
And I was just so impressed by this issue and so moved by it, and it is something I return to. So thank you so much for doing this. And such a great idea, DMs, to do this to us. And thank you for that. I just wanted to say, you know, I'm a big fan of your director work. Your production of For Colored Girls was the best I've ever seen, hands down. And I just wondered, are there similarities between the role of director and the role of editor in terms of kind of shifting, shifting genres, shifting mediums, trying to bring people together in a common purpose? I just wondered if you could speak a little bit to kind of those two roles.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a really great question. What Professor Stewart is referring to, back in 2009, I directed a production of For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. I was in a theater class with the late Mark Hunter, and I was having a really difficult time connecting with the material that we were talking about. He literally comes to my table, slams it. Oh, that didn't have the effect I wanted. There we go. Okay. Slams his book on my table in a loving manner and says, "Read this, come back to me and talk to me," right? And so I go back, and it was the first time, one, that I saw myself in the material in the theater department. Two, the vernacular in which it was used and the way in which storytelling was accessible was absolutely beautiful. And I was like, we need to do this here. And so it was the first time that we had an all cast of color on Cornell's campus, and we did a 3-day series of the production. So that's what that's referring to. But I think just having one, and I give you that context because it's really important to be able to see the possibilities that are here. Yes, the mainstream of the theater department did not have folks who look like me on the stage, but how can I create that space for myself? How do I make sure that stories are being told that reflect the multidimensional existence that I have and other people have, right? And so being able to push that forward, I learned a lot within that process of how do you curate something like this? How do you recruit? How do you create the space of safety and bravery for people to tell their stories so that they can be vulnerable? All of that translates over into the Cornell report. the difference between the two is when we start talking about for colored girls, those stories are already written, and what you're doing as an actor, as a performer, is bringing those stories to life. And for a lot of folks, they were able to identify with the stories that are there, so for them, it was a lot easier, right? Here, we were pulling stories from them, stories that they already knew, but didn't know were important to tell, or did not have the space to tell them. And so I think the curation and the facilitation of both being a director and being an editor are very, very similar, because you learn how to tell the best story in both settings.
Thank you for the question, Katie, and your response, Heather. Any other ideas or questions from the audience? Yes.
Zach English, I graduated 2019. Fantastic article. It's incredible just to be able to see the different perspectives, to be able to have that different sense of representation. However, this is the first time this has ever been done, at least from your guest editorial position, everything of that nature. How has this experience, and this could also maybe relate to you a little bit more, Hemi, as well, but how has this experience shaped the future processes of DEI on this campus, and how we're going to keep, because the biggest issue is moving forward and keeping the issue prevalent and making sure that it's still talked about. So this is one article that does an amazing job, but how has that changed the process moving forward?
I'll pick it up when I see your girls turning. That's a really great question. I love that. Yes. So this issue was important for setting the stage. We needed to first acknowledge and have that conversation. And to go back to, I think somebody mentioned earlier, right? Not a lot of people are doing that, right? And so this issue was so important because we had to set the foundation. We talked a lot about, because when I tell you, so I'm like an Excel nerd. I love using Excel, and I love brainstorming and having all this stuff. We had lists and lists and lists of stories. And so how do we make sure to include those in future things? In terms of just the Cornell report, right? How are we having broader conversations around this topic as a community and creating that space to it?
What she said. No, but not seriously, I think to add to that, yes, it creates an environment to where you can have specifically these conversations on about people's experience, right? What their experience like here, and then obviously it can move. The hope is we're moving in a direction to where we can have a conversation about whatever your experience is, right? Your experience as an athlete, your experience as a woman, your experience as an international student, and so on and so on. Yes, everyone who goes to school here is a RAN. Everyone who works here is a RAN. Everyone has similar student experience on this campus in terms of going to, well, for you, the RAN, and to the next one. But for you all going into wars or going to the CAP or having to, taking an OCAM class or whatever, everyone has those shared experiences. But there are other lived experiences that aren't being told, that we're not hearing, that we're kids, not just kids, that you young people are going through. And we don't set that stage to say, hey, what was your experience like being a student athlete? Well, I don't know. No one's never asked me before. Well, we create the stage for you to have that conversation. What's your experience like being a theater major? Or being an OCAM major? What is that like? And so that is the hope. That is the plan that we're allowing folks to not only be themselves, but be able to express themselves. Express why they got here, how they got here, why they stayed, not only the issues, right? Because I think a lot of times when we talk about either DEI work or telling people stories, we're always talking about the issues that are going on. And I'm not saying that we don't need to talk about them, because that's very important to move forward. But how do we celebrate some of these things that are going on? Like, that was one of my, when Heather had the Color Girls performance, it was dope, it was great. And I remember I was working at the African American History Museum, I was like, look, I need to try to bring you out to Des Moines. I don't know how we're going to do it, but that was one of the first times, for one, I seen a student play, a student put something together, and on top of that, I know this girl. Like, this is a friend of mine, right? And so just setting that stage of having people be able to tell their story, and outside of just, of course, yes, we want to start with diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also understand that when we talk about diversity, it's not just about race and ethnicity. There's religion, there's socioeconomic, and so on and so on and so on. So we can set the stage where people can tell their stories and be comfortable with who they are. That's how we're going to move forward. But if we keep saying, oh no, we're all the same, we're lying to ourselves. No, we're lying to ourselves. Every person in this room has a separate story. We have shared stories, and of course we have shared stories. And I love the fact that, but we all have something different that needs to be told and needs to be heard.
I just want to add real quick to that, because I have time to make my wheels turn. I think one of the ideal things that I would love to see is, one, that understanding of equity, what that actually means and shows up in an institution like this. And then two, what does it look like for us to diversify our curriculum? That's going to be a huge feat, but a necessary feat in order to be able to move this work forward.
I think that's such a good question. And it's tough for me because I don't have the networks that Heather has. But I have Heather, I have Kimi, I have the new Alumni of Color Association. I think I would love to be able to tap into their networks and expertise. We have, and of course there are a lot of stories that they finish. There are ideas that they get fleshed out. And so we have a list. We're trying to keep it top of mind of what ways to keep this topic going forward in the magazine, and it's just something that we're going to have to work harder at. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Any other questions? We have one more question here. Okay, let me bring the mic over. That seemed to work last time.
Okay, a couple things. First of all, Deanne has done some great job. Highlighted the Cornell report, and it's on I had the opportunity to go to Boston, and I was performing on a concert series anyway. But this is the Harvard campus, and Cornell is much prettier, much better campus.
All right, always appreciate the commitment to our campus. Thank you. Any other questions? No, one of the things that's come up a couple times, and we only have about 5 minutes left or so. One of the things that's come up a couple times today is the creation of the Alumni of Color Association. Kimi, would you be able to share a little bit more about that, where you're at with things right now, and some of the goals?
So the initial onset or the idea came from, so I didn't go to Cornell. I went to another small private institution north of here I won't talk about. And so we, at my alma mater, we have a Black Alumni Association. And even before that, as a student, we went to, they had an alumni reunion, and I was talking to some of the alums, and just some of the stories that they were telling me about how they function at said school, the things that they were doing at said school. It kind of revitalized, like man, I need to do more on campus. I was very similar to Heather, student athlete, I was an RA, I was in dance. I was in a lot of different things, and part of me doing that is if I want to make my experience better, I have to be more involved. I have to find a way to be myself, bring who I am into said school. And so I wanted to kind of create that, have that atmosphere to where students can connect with alums who've been through it, like with that specific story. The idea wasn't to say, hey, let's have a session where we're mad and we're pissing them on about how bad Cornell is. No, it's okay, how do we connect them so they have a great experience? So when they leave out of here, they're doing the same thing, right? So when you leave out of here, now you know I have to reach back. Kay, when you leave out of here, I have to reach back and help the students. And in conjunction with everything else that the college is doing with the overall alumni association, with the alumni engagement office, and so on and so on. So that was kind of my reasoning for wanting to do that. And then so of course, hey Heather, are you free? And so there were several other along the color, Jai as well, along the color that I tapped into. Was like, hey, this is my idea. What do you all think? And for the most part, they kind of took it and ran with it, in which I was happy to pass it off, right? Because it's not my story to tell. I'm not an alum, as I said, of Cornell. I'm an alum of said school, right? And so I wanted to pass it off to them to kind of help them guide them down the path. But hey, this is your story to tell. This is essentially your job to do this. Because it was passed on to me that hey, it's your job to make sure that alums, students at your school are finding ways to navigate being a student of color there. So I wanted to pass that on. So some of our goals is to find ways we're building a mentor network, building ways like this. And I know tomorrow we have a session where they're meeting some of the alums. Some of the alums are meeting some of the students of color just to connect with how are things going. And the hope to possibly, if there are other affinity groups, I don't know, just so people can tell their story and have those connections where they have that identity or whatever said identity is.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that. So as mentioned earlier, this panel today is part of a larger program, the Beta Omicron Distinguished Alumni Visitors Program. Again, just want to thank again for our Beta Omicron alums and actives who are in the audience today. But Heather, can you share a bit about your experience the past 36 or I guess 48 hours on campus? Heather has visited classes in economics and business, English and education, met with a bunch of our student writers through Lyrically Inclined, which is the organization Heather started 16 years ago. So can you just share a little bit about what that's like to come back in that capacity?
It's reinvigorating. Like I can't assess my body right now fully because I'm on this high of one, being back on campus, but then two, being able to meet so many students that have so much ahead of them, and to have the conversations and to give context, right, too. It's wild walking through this campus. When I was here, we were at 7% students of color and international students. We are now at 26%. And so to see that beauty just visually on campus literally makes me want to jump for joy. I think some people actually saw me jump for joy. And so to see the progression, I know that like Kimi was saying earlier, it's really easy to focus on what we're not doing, but we need to be very intentional about celebrating what we are doing and what we're doing well. If you think about the United States as a whole, and if you calculate the population from the last census, we're at about 36% people of color, right? This campus as a whole, we're at 26, 27%. And if you look at other percentages at other schools, they're not at that level. So folks are not doing the work that we were doing. That needs to be celebrated, right? The Cornell report and the fact that we focus on this issue needs to be celebrated. I honestly want to take the time to thank Jonathan Brand, because you're at the level that allowed this to happen, where a lot of folks would not have wanted to have this conversation, wanted to do the work. We had a conversation where we were challenging each other, like what does that look like to be at that level and set the stage for an entire campus to do what's necessary to create a better world. So I just want to publicly thank you so much for the opportunity. But being here has just been, it's been really great. I really enjoy working with students, talking about my own journey of entrepreneurship that started here. Like it started at 18 in Stoner House, talking to the former director of intercultural life about my dream of owning my own business. Like, what does that business look like? And then thinking of all the little things that I can do, creating my own major in a BSS in performance arts, which is a combination of theater and English, creating Lyrically Inclined, being all involved in organizations, and learning how to navigate that, and to come back and see young entrepreneurs in the class and talking about what they're up to and what my journey's been like and what my learnings are and will continue to be. And then listening to their pitches, y'all. Like I had to do a lightning round of responses to business pitches, which was really exciting. Being a part of the creative writing class and having them map out just a sliver of their stories that created 20 different, if not more possibilities for stories, right? Just that people have a tendency to say, oh, I don't have a story. Ha! Or I'm not special. Ha! Like literally, everyone is special, everyone is unique, and everyone has that story. And how do we like lean into that? And then the education class, them po babies, it was a Friday. I had everything against me. It was a Friday morning. It's raining. It's third week of the block, and it's homecoming week. What I was walking into was a challenge. But they were able to lean into the conversation and hopefully set the stage for them going out and affecting anywhere between 600 and 3,600 students when they get out into the world. And then that will hopefully trickle down. So I'm on a high, and it's a great high. And I'm just really thankful for the opportunity and the conversations, and for you all being here and listening and asking questions and being a part of the conversation. This is where we need to be, and I'm just super grateful to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, I think those comments are probably the perfect place to put a halt to the conversation. We're right at about our time, but Heather, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be our Beta Omicron Distinguished Alumni Visitor and just being the wonderful you that you bring every single day to your life. So thank you very much.
And shout out again to DA and Mimi and Jason for bringing me out. Beta Omicron, I really appreciate just all of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And there are many people that made this actual event possible. I want to thank our colleagues, Megan and Mason, who have been running the live stream for us. It's very helpful. Our colleagues across marketing communications, alumni engagement, student affairs, academic affairs, a lot goes into this. I also want to thank President Brand again for attending. We have members of the alumni board in the audience, the board of trustees, faculty, staff. Thank you for coming out today. Yeah, we absolutely appreciate it. All right, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.